What's up everybody, this is BR, and I do think that it's finally time that we take out competitive mode out back and, tell it about the rabbits. Sure, I've made a lot of videos talking about how Arenas is Apex's failed game mode, but I don't think any game mode has been botched as badly as TF2's. At least Apex's Arenas has a reason to exist. It was thought out seasons before it was ever released, and it had a purpose of making Apex more than just a battle royale game. That is unlike TF2's competitive game mode, which, to put it lightly, is severely underwhelming, it is half-baked, and it was pretty much destined to fail. If you've never played TF2's competitive mode, then just know that it is similar to every other single competitive game out there in the market at the moment. The matchmaking is nearly exactly the same. You join a skill-based matchmaking queue that pits you up against players of similar skill depending on their elo score. You have to do the typical 10 games to earn your rank, and depending on whether or not your team wins or loses, your matchmaking rank gets adjusted. Pretty much the same as Counter-Strike, Overwatch, and anything else that you can really think of nowadays. But unlike every other competitive matchmaked game out there, TF2 wasn't designed for it. TF2 was, and still is, a casual 24-player server brawl, with a wide variety of classes and a huge array of weapons. While there were only 2 teams, fighting would pretty much just boil down to little skirmishes around the map, everybody having their small little adventure while still having a common goal. So imagine now taking that concept and trying to make it into a ranked matchmaker, especially without modifying anything about the base game, which is exactly what Valve did. They didn't really change anything. There was no weapon ban list, no player limits, no class limits. Changes weren't really made for the benefit of competitive mode. They did rebalance a couple of weapons for the sake of competitive mode, but that was reverted soon after because they realized that the greater TF2 community wasn't a fan of these changes. But overall, that's what they were aiming to do, just make competitive mode casual, but with a competitive twist. Just like with Counter-Strike, just like with Overwatch. However, TF2 really didn't accomplish that. The competitive mode that we ended up getting was something far worse, something that just people didn't want to play. It's really hard to pinpoint exactly where competitive mode failed, but here are some parts that really did affect its quality. First off, the map choices were not only limited, but they were extremely strange. Rather than having a wide variety, especially in terms of breadth of what maps to play on, most of the maps in competitive mode were mostly 5CP. Which honestly isn't the worst thing in the world. There are some 5CP maps that are outstanding, and for the greater competitive community, many of them would agree that Valve did choose a couple of good maps. However, it really would have been more appreciated if they would have gone outside even more. Rather than making 80% of the map pool 5CP, they could have gone with a lot more payload or King of the Hill. Arguably, King of the Hill is one of the most basic, but at the same time, most competitively viable game mode in TF2. However, they only ever included one King of the Hill map, and that was Viaduct, which isn't the most well-designed map, but still put a lot of variety into what we played on competitively. And it would have been much better if we had maps like Badlands or Lakeside included into the mix. Same goes with payload, since we were missing a lot of iconic payload maps from TF2. We were missing Barnblitz, Borneo, and even disgracefully, Upward. And yeah, there could be an argument to be made that these weren't the most competitively viable maps for a 6's format, but come on, Turbine was in the map pool. Turbine is in no way competitively viable. And even though 5CP is a good game mode for the most part, even though many don't agree with me, that game mode really doesn't benefit all the classes. When you're trying to bring players from casual mode who probably have experience with multiple classes, not just soldier, demoman, medic, or scout, they're really gonna be turned off by 5CP because those classes like Heavy, Engineer, Spy, or Sniper really don't thrive that well on 5CP. There's this whole spiel about generalists and specialists in, community competitive, but that's just way out of this scope. All you have to know is that Scout, Soldier, Demoman, and Medic are really strong on 5CP and every other class isn't. So having the competitive mode be mostly 5CP was definitely a misstep, which really showed how much Valve really misconstrued communication from the greater competitive community, because many attribute the inclusion of so many 5CP maps to the fault of the competitive community. Which makes sense, because the competitive community mostly plays 5CP, but that's because that's how the format is structured with. You're supposed to be playing with 2 scouts, 2 soldiers, 1 demoman, and 1 medic, and 5CP fits this format perfectly. That's why there's such a huge competitive community revolving around traditional 6's. It's just a unique experience. But Valve decided to not fully commit to it, instead having to go their own path, but at the same time, taking a little bit of the suggestions from the greater competitive community without implementing the structure that the competitive community already had. So what you're left with is this amalgamation of just bad choices that made competitive mode just not fun to play, and just made it hands down unpalatable. So straight from the get-go, competitive mode wasn't popular, and thus it never actually had that many players to begin with. And that just caused greater disdain with competitive mode, since nobody would be playing it, queue times were long, and it really just wasn't worth it. Put in the fact that VAC doesn't work and competitive mode is just a huge giant joke. 9 out of 10 times you're gonna face off against a cheater who is taking advantage of players who just don't know better. And thus, that's where we are today. Competitive mode is not worked on because TF2 isn't being worked on, and it's just one hell of a terrible time. And I know I talk a lot of shit about Arenas mode and Apex, but the reason why I do that more than this is because Apex really doesn't have an excuse. They can iterate it, they have the time, they have the money, they have the resources. So talking about that kind of bad experience is because, you know, they have the possibility to change it for the better. They just don't. Unfortunately, TF2 doesn't have that same possibility. They're just not gonna work on it. But you know who can work on it? Our imaginations. And so, I think it's more than fair to have a little bit of a suggestion section for this video, as I just don't want to complain, I also have my own ideas as well. And to give you a little bit of background here, let me tell you what really inspired this idea, and this video in general. Me and 2 of my buddies were playing on a casual server around midnight. And for whatever reason, casual was being a little bit tough on the terms of trying to find a full server. Eventually, we just settled on a Borneo server since we just assumed that more people would join as time went on. But the server never got past 12 players in total. There were 6 versus 6 teams on both sides, and what I noticed is that the match was intense since we were all trying, and the team was actually fairly balanced. But most importantly, it was a lot of fun. And this really struck to me because that's what I just like doing on TF2. TF2 really doesn't need a battle pass, it doesn't need more content, it's a fun game on its own. That's why people still play it even after around 5 years of no content. And this made me come up with the idea that instead of having a competitive mode that's the same as every other competitive mode, why not just come up with something that fits TF2? Because competitive mode at this point not only needs a good change, it also needs a good rebrand. I think competitive as a term for TF2 has just, you know, kind of been bastardized at this point. So here's my suggestion, get rid of competitive mode completely. Instead, replace it with a choice on casual to choose how many players you want to go up against. Either a 12v12 server or a 6v6 server. When you choose 6v6, the map pool will be limited to the maps that fit this 6v6 playstyle, and then you will queue up for a match for TF2 that only limits it to 6 players on each team. Nothing too fancy. And once you get into a match, don't have the whole ready up to startup thing. Just make it commence as soon as possible, just as it would be like any other server. If somebody leaves, replace them immediately with somebody who's queuing up. Of course, still punish players who leave frequently, but I think like around 4 times should be, you know, at least the bare minimum before any punishments do come up. The whole point is to make this more intense competitive mode a lot less serious. We don't want people to just play this game for the glory or anything like that. It's just for fun. Why have all these checks and MMR and all this stuff for a game mode that you know you're not going to be able to guarantee total satisfaction with? Just limit the player count, limit the map pool, and even include a skill-based matchmaking system, since this is what that's meant for. You can include ranks and all that stuff, but don't make it as stingent as the actual competitive mode that we have now. Allow people to leave or join or whatever. Don't make it such a pain in the ass to commit to it. All I want to do is play a game mode that is a little bit more intense than base TF2, where I do want to sweat a little, but without the frustration that many other competitive games have. If the game turns out to be shitty because of a thrower or a cheater or whatever, just leave the game. There's no punishment to it, just find a new one. With this change in mentality, players aren't gonna have this high expectation that this is gonna be some sort of highly organized competitive league or whatever. We're all just here to have a good time and have a good time sweating together. Man, that came out wrong. And if we wanna lay back, then we just go play casual. And if you really do think that this is not gonna fix anything, trust me, man, anything is better than the competitive mode that we have now. And having this mode that is basically just casual plus, looks a hell of a lot more appealing than whatever the hell Valve gave us. So in conclusion, competitive mode would be replaced by this less organized offering that still tries to deliver a more intense experience, one where players get to sweat, being flexible on leaving or entering matches because eventually you'll find a good match. Because if there's one thing that drives me up the fucking wall is entering a competitive match after waiting for 60 minutes, only to find out that it's infested with cheaters. By making it more accessible, more people are gonna try it out, and by making it not so much of a time commitment, people won't take the game mode over seriously. After all, we're just here to have fun. But please tell me what you think down in the comment section below. What do you think of my idea? What do you think about competitive mode? How would you restructure competitive mode to be a lot better for TF2? Make sure to leave your opinion down in the comment section below. If you found this video interesting, like it if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it. If you'd like to see more videos just like this, make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, my Patreon is in the description. Thank you so much to my fellow patrons, and I will catch you later.